Hi, welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy. This is a special series on the topic of relationships matter, and today I am really thrilled and excited to be joined by Hasti Yavari. I hope I said that right, Hasti, sort of ish.
Good enough, close enough.
Thanks for being here, Hasti. How are you?
Thanks, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good too. I'm really good. So to begin with, Hasti, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. So my name is Hasti. I'm originally born in Iran. I moved out pretty early when I was 16 and been living in a few places since. I landed in Cork 2 years ago. Now it's going to the third year. And yeah, it's been lovely so far. My background is a bit more science.
Okay.
I have a bachelor's in electronics, master's in physics. I worked for a while as a R&D research and development engineer, and now doing a PhD in Cork. But one of my biggest passion, or if not the biggest passion, is yoga. I also teach yoga. That's how I know you, Jay.
Yeah.
So yeah, happy to be here and just have a chat with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hasti. So as you say, I'm doing a bit for branding for Hot Yoga Cork here because I am a fanatic
Lovely.
these days. And I do two of your classes, Vinyasa and Yin Yoga on a Monday, and they're super. But maybe you can tell me a little bit now about how you got into yoga yourself and how long have you been practicing and how and why you became a teacher then.
Sure. So I've been practicing for a few years now. I was living in Sweden when I first took my first yoga class, actually. And my first ever experience, I remember it was in a gym. And then the teacher said, let's salute the sun. And me, with my, I guess, scientific mind, I was just like, I don't want to do this. This sounds like a cult, you know? But then, I feel like something changed in me after like going back to these classes. And then eventually I signed up also in a hot studio. I kept going back, and very soon I thought, okay, I really want to learn more. So I did teacher trainings. It was more like for my own learning rather than teaching, because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like, okay, I'm still very new to this. I can't really teach. But then I did a few more teacher trainings and eventually feel like could find my own voice within yoga. And then I stepped into the teaching world.
Yeah, and you're super. I find it very interesting actually that you mention the scientific mind, and how that might not have been initially a comfortable fit with the more esoteric and dare I say what some people might think hippie side of yoga, about the breath, the body, like some of the invitations even, which I must say I really love now, but a few years ago I might have been a bit more wary myself. One thing, I knew that yoga was phenomenally good for people before I started doing it. I've only been doing it actually 9 months at the hot yoga studio, and it's very near my house, which is why it's handy. But for years, I've been telling people yoga, it's excellent, it's brilliant for stress relief, brilliant for sleep, many, many things. And in my own research, I'm very interested in stress and trauma and how it impacts us, how it can change our ability to relate to people, how it can impact our physical and mental health, and also make us behave in ways that we don't want to behave in really. And also I've learned that many people, particularly maybe in the West, are quite disembodied, so that we're not very connected. We're very in our head and we're thinking and the monkey mind, and either obsessed with the past or obsessed with the future and worrying. So sorry, very long, convoluted sort of question, but it is coming. I'm also now very interested in how we feel safe in our bodies or not around other people. And as a yoga teacher, what is your own understanding of this kind of felt sense of safety in our body around other people, or where we might lack that felt sense of safety?
No, that's a good question, Jim. I think, like going back to the science part, I think maybe perhaps as a modern society, we just conditions ourselves in a way that, okay, we have to have a certain data, we have to have a conclusion,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
write a paper. But when it comes to yoga, the first and foremost idea is that this is experience-based. So there's a lot of science now behind it, research, but they all came very recently. I mean, the practice is very old. And so I think that's the first step, to actually be like, I'm going to allow myself to experience, and for my own judgments, which it's not an obvious thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do, because we are unfortunately a bit more used to just being told how to feel, what to do, and so we are not that much willing to take agency over our own experience of life, in a sense, in my view. So I think when it comes to trauma, obviously we know that the people can end up in this state of numbness and just dissociation, which basically comes from our neurons not firing in I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but like my understanding is that. And so through yoga, we can just enhance that. So regulate the nervous system a bit more. So you actually also, in the spatial sense, where's your right hand, where's the left hand? That's not very obvious sometimes, especially if you're upside down or, so I think it's, first of all, giving yourself that agency to feel what you feel and actually analyze it. And then second is to let the process happen, so you experience it. And some of us need more convincing, so then that's where all the other ideas come from. I also think so, like, going back to yoga and mindfulness comes from this Sanskrit and Pali word that is sati, that means to be aware. And in our language, when we say, in English, when we say, oh, someone is self-conscious, not a good thing, you're not, like, you're just kind of tightening up. But in reality, you want to be conscious of the self and just know what's happening. And I think that that's also another benefit, that the more conscious of self and what's going on around you are, then you also allow yourself to feel safer, so you're not in fight or flight or just constantly scanning, looking for threats subconsciously even. You can sort of be and actually experience the present moment.
And so particularly, say, for your classes that I've done, the vinyasa, there's a sequence that you add on certain postures then too. Some of them are more difficult than others, and certainly with repetition you get stronger. I've noticed that myself. The balance improves, all of that. But is there also a thing with people that, we're our own worst critic and we want to do the posture really well and maybe don't listen to the instruction? I found this too, not listening to the stuff about the breath or whatever. And ideally, you kind of do it all at the one time. Isn't that right? That you tune in and you get curious. That's one of your invitations too, to get curious about whatever is going on.
So that's another skill, I think it's a muscle that you train to just do fewer things at the same time. The more things that come natural to you, obviously you can focus on the other stuff. So if you're barely breathing, obviously you can't think about what am I engaging in the right place or what's going on. I really think it's, again, just like practicing and then listening also to that inner critic, the inner saboteur, that, okay, why do you always tell me this? I'm, as a teacher, sometimes I have classes, I'm like, oh, like the voice comes in and then I'm like, okay, I see you and I acknowledge you, but let me do my own thing, it's okay. So in a way, I think it's also making peace with that inner voice that can be doubtful sometimes, can be critical, but also can be loving and encouraging.
Thanks, Hasti. Yeah, definitely, it's very satisfying when you can start to do a tricky posture, like some of the balancing ones on the hands that are really, really hard, and you can lift your toe a little bit longer. But as you say, it's even to just trying it, or just giving it a go and being patient with the practice. I like that, actually. The more you go, just even thinking about it as a practice rather than a thing that you do once every 6 months and expect some kind of miracle to happen. It's not going to be that way. To maybe return to the issue of trauma, and my understanding is that it's very much held in the body. Like, it can have psychological impacts, but a lot of it is trapped energy. and that where people have too much just stress as well, too much stress, they're overwhelmed by it. It doesn't need to be, you know, a massive traumatic event from childhood or wherever else. But it can impact the person's then enjoyment of their body, that it's not a joyful, energetic body anymore, as Deepak Chopra might say. Do you think our kind of mainstream health services and whatever adequately address this impact? And can yoga add something else for people?
That's a good question. So I think a lot of this responsibility has been sort of put onto us as individuals to take care of ourselves, eat well, exercise, sleep well, you know, and I feel like that in itself puts a lot of pressure on you as a person. Very often when I start a class, I send out questionnaires to people of just asking what's their goal of taking this course, and almost always the first answer is that to reduce stress. So I think it's obviously trauma is a big part, like bigger traumas, people who are suffering from PTSD or this conditions that actually sort of impacts their daily life. But on a smaller scale, all of us are also just dealing with that stress. And I think that's the part that the modern society fails. So if you take the pyramid of human needs, you know, we met the first needs and then the next ones, and then eventually we are reaching a little bit further up the pyramid, and we are thinking, okay, what's next? And then I think that's where we have to take steps back, that okay, how do I take care of myself? What does work for me? Maybe, I mean, even just in the asana case, some people really want something more sweaty, more active. And then some people know they really just want something a little bit more yin, a little bit slow. And I think that even takes agency to just listen in and see what works for you. So you don't deprive yourself of a practice because you're just being pessimistic about it.
Yeah, and for sure, not everything will suit everyone equally. Like a lot of people may hate the hot yoga. I wasn't sure I'd be able to handle it myself, but I find it great for sleep, actually. It really helps me that way. But certainly the yin, the slowness of it, the holding the postures for longer, it brings a different dimension. It's also a lot more easy to tune into the breath, probably because you're holding for so much longer. And so we've kind of touched on this, I think, but how can yoga over time, again, obviously not after 2 classes in the hot room or doing yin or anything else, but how can it help us feel more at home in our bodies and more at ease and more safe and grounded?
So I mean, the physical benefits of yoga, we have a long list, you know, better balance, better heart function, especially when it comes with the breath, our strength, our flexibility. But I think if you think about a physiological point of view, it's really just promoting blood circulation that also impacts inflammation. It in fact impacts our experience of life. So I think a lot of a yoga practice is on learning and delayering, so you can actually have more space to feel and more space to experience life rather than just being in self-preservance mode. I think it's also that time that we take for ourselves. We might not want to admit this, but I think it's very rare in our everyday lives that for 1 hour or however long the classes we would be without our devices. So that I think that in itself is very empowering and groundbreaking. You know, the bar is really low when we talk about 1 hour without our devices, but unfortunately that's where we are, and we have to be realistic about that. Okay, how do I move on from there?
And one thing I noticed at the beginning, and I see it a lot in the hot room, especially after hot yoga, that newbies want to bolt out of there very quickly because they've barely survived it. Maybe, you know, it's been quite intense, and I was the same. But talk to me a little bit about the importance of Shavasana. Why is that important, and why is it good to remain in stillness for a period of time?
So traditionally, yoga asana, the postures are really just meant for us to be able to hold still for longer, so that we can just get more familiar the contents of our mind, what's going on, and basically that philosophical question of why we're here and what's the reason behind all of this. So shavasana is a posture lying in our backs. It's not a seated meditative posture, but it's that state of trying to hold still. It translates into dead body pose, corpse pose. So like embodying a dead body, you know, in a sense, allowing ourselves to hold still in the body so that maybe we can also hold still in the mind. I think when it comes to asana practice, very often it's actually really difficult posture. I see people like playing the piano or like doing this. And I've been doing that myself. So I really see how
On
that
their
is.
body, you mean, or on the floor?
I mean, like just like not being able to hold still. So you're just
Okay.
pinching or doing something. But the idea with Shavasana is to allow everything to integrate. So when you're finished with a class, you don't just jump out and hop onto your devices again, or just don't take that time to integrate, basically. I think also it can in itself be a very empowering posture, you know, because you're telling yourself, I did it, now I'm gonna give myself this time to just simply don't do anything.
Mm-hmm. I've certainly come to love it. You know, I find it very relaxing. And again, particularly after a very intense session, then just lying there and the cool air as well. It's funny the things that become really beautiful.
That's your
And
senses heightening. You're like,
yeah.
wow, look at this airflow.
Yeah, and I can breathe better now that I'm on the ground finally. Yeah, it's very interesting, and just noticing those changes and the depth of the breath. One of my favorite phrases of yours, and I've actually used it in various talks, you know, citing Hasti. I'm sure other people might have said it as well, but where can you soften, where can you let go? I think it's a beautiful phrase. And kind of, what are you inviting people to do there, Hasti?
Thank you, that makes me really happy, Jane. But I love this phrase myself too, because I feel like it sends this question, that invitation of, first of all, tuning in, checking in, and then you're doing a scan in your body, in your mind, that, okay, maybe my jaw is too tight, maybe I'm clenching my fist, or maybe my shoulders are a bit like that. Or maybe it's a thought from the morning, I'm thinking, I have this podcast I have to talk about, what should I say, like, so then just checking in and be like, okay, maybe I can soften there. And sometimes it's a momentary softness, you have to remind yourself again, but again, it's that mindfulness of just being aware of what's going on, so conscious of the self.
Yeah, and another invitation that I've liked at various points and possibly didn't know what it meant at first, and maybe still don't, but was, when maybe a forward fold, or in the child's pose, where you invite people to make more space at the back of the chest. What's that about?
So I think actually there's a very specific terminology in yoga that perhaps like it doesn't really translate, and the first time you hear it, you're like, okay, what is that? What is that? But as you said, like, it's just like building our own understanding. For me, it's basically just using more of our lungs capacity and allowing the space between our shoulder blades to just soften as well. You could think you're breathing deeply, but then again, if you tune in, you're like, actually, I could do this way, or I could do that way. Basically, I think that's just a cue to again check in.
Yeah, and you might also have said at the space at the back of the heart too at times, which again is a lovely picture to kind of feel, because we're tuning into our body in different ways, and obviously in different postures, but I find them lovely. Often I'd be thinking I need to write that one down now afterwards.
But sometimes I actually place my hand there, after asking for permission, of course, and I really do physically feel that softness. So even though I think we are a bit more detached from our back body compared to our front body, but you could see that we have that control to like soften a little bit more, even in those spaces that we don't normally think about.
And isn't that interesting too? Because I think touch is a remarkable thing. And obviously, as you say, not everyone likes it. It doesn't feel safe. It's a bit weird for people. But I think you've done it to me before. And I've also felt the kind of, not collapsing, but yeah, deepening maybe. And there's something interesting about the fact that someone else's hand just gently can help prompt that. I find that super interesting. Why do you think that is? Why does that help?
I personally think a lot of it is comfort, because physical touch is comfort. So you sort of feel a bit more held, a little bit safer if you have that response. Obviously, to touch, some people can have the opposite response. It can also be that from like just my hand is carrying electrons as I'm moving. So that's also that touch that maybe creates that extra grounding of having a current move through.
The energy, again, the energy from one person to another. I think it's amazing. And just one other one on your yoga training then, when you decided that you wanted to take this step and go from just practicing regularly to teaching it, and as I say, you're exceptional. All the people I think in the hot yoga studio are really, really great. But do people typically get training, wider training about the human condition? So I suppose about attachment, child development, the brain, neurobiology, neurodivergence, stress, trauma, and all of these kind of survival mechanisms.
So I think it really much depends on your training,
Okay.
because traditionally the idea is that yoga is experience-based.
Okay.
And very little talk about these conditions actually, but then there are now trainings that are basically trauma-informed yoga practices. Okay. And then they talk more about it. I think in many of the teacher trainings, they offer books, for example, like The Body Keeps the Score.
Okay.
I've even seen the polyvagal theory book. But then it's more up to you to read that as well. I don't think it's a standardized thing. And at the end of the day, I think it's just up to a certain, like up to an individual to see what path you want to take.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, it's not necessary either, except that people might get activated perhaps by certain postures as well, or when we're invited to tune into sensations, certain things might be more threatening without a person having any conscious knowledge of it. So for example, I think some people say that yin can be quite beneficial for people who've experienced trauma. And certainly Bessel van der Kolk has written quite a lot about the healing benefits of yoga. So I was just wondering, it was just of interest to me about that. And so I'd like to just ask you a few kind of more personal questions now, Hasti, as well, because after I got to know you a little bit as a teacher, and then I saw something somewhere about your activism and, coming from Iran, being here in Ireland. One of the things in the show that I haven't really discussed to date is people's attachment to place. So the relationship to where they're from, or just some other place. But I think that our countries of origin do shape us in ways, or have a massive impact on our opportunities and experience of the world. Attachment to place can be beautiful, but it can be painful, it can be complex. So for you, as an Iranian woman living in Cork via Sweden and other places, can you tell me a little bit about your own relationship to Iran?
This is a very good question. Actually, something that I think about quite often. That what is it that makes us who we are? Is it our origin, our story, and in a way also just to own your own story? I think very often you could, or I personally could just think everything happened by accident. I went on this path and now I ended up here. But then looking back, I see everything that led to each other so that I could be here, Iran is a beautiful place, a very complicated place. And I think that it won't escape you when you meet an Iranian. They are a lot more complicated than the average person. And I think that relationship has been a bit of a just up and down a roller coaster, but now it's a lot more loving. It's more like a mother-child relationship that, okay, this is my family, and I might not like certain things, I might love some certain things, but that belonging, it's just not questionable, and it's always there no matter what. So yeah, I think even I speak a lot of English or Swedish at times, but I really noticed the language of your mother tongue, how that sort of touches you in a different place, you know, how
Yes.
you're just if that's not your place of origin, if that's not like your core of being, then I think that's really says a lot. Yeah, so going back to the activism, I think that was also a point of just reclaiming and feeling a bit maybe more open or belonging, in a sense that, okay, this is my story. It might not be very pretty, it might not be very easy, forward, standard, but it is my own story, and I like it the way it is, you know, and I'm just gonna own it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think really, I mean, I wouldn't call myself an activist. This was just something that was more like a duty, but at the same time, very healing. That part of being more heuristic about your life rather than a victim, or rather than just an object, you know, so you're more autonomous.
Yeah, I get you. And that is possibly tricky, because I don't think Ireland has much of an Iranian population, does it, in terms of migrants?
Much, no.
Yeah, so that our awareness might be quite limited. There's a lady I follow on Twitter, all right, she's a teacher, and she was tweeting at various points when things flared up, and she was devastated by what was going on. Because I'm sure she still has family there, even though she may not have been back recently. Do you manage to go? Do you have family still over there, Hasti?
I have my parents. I mean, I won't necessarily go back in the immediate future, but hopefully sometime soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the activism or the awareness raising, you say, was driven by a kind of impulse to be active, I guess, to be active and not just looking blankly at what was happening and try to was part of it as well to try and get people here, because you were here for at least some of it. You might have done some elsewhere too, but get people here to notice even what was happening. Did that have a dimension to it?
So I think the first question for me to answer then was that, is this even my place? You know,
Okay.
obviously I'm not a politician. I'm not like used to be activist. You know, I didn't know much, and I think that was the first step to not wait for reaching a certain point before I gave myself the permission to act.
Yeah.
And I think the more this went on, I saw that this is a very reciprocal relationship, that the more I do, I also feel better, more I develop a deeper relationship to myself and my roots, in a sense. I think a lot of it was also just because I felt like there is a lot happening I can't really do much about, but the least perhaps I can do is to make sure people know about it, so they are just not going in vain. That's another question, if people necessarily have to know about it or not. But I think at the end of the day, it's just so that those events won't happen in a vacuum, and then it's your choice if you want to subscribe to that information or not. Yeah.
And I think that's a very interesting point too, because you're one person, you have many other things going on in your life. And human rights issues are something that people can think are nothing to do with them often. They're out there, or, let's say it's LGBT rights. Well, I'm not LGBT, so that it has nothing to do with me, or
Right.
I'm a man, so why are women's rights or reproductive health anything to do with me? I shouldn't say anything about it, or I'll say everything and try and restrict rights. But from your experience, do you think it is beneficial, or again, I mean, I'm not trying to prompt you to say that everyone should become human rights activists, but do you think that there might be less chaos and hardship and oppression in the world if more of us actually gave a hoot about it and got active?
100%. And I don't think it's just human rights. I mean, if you just look at our Mother Earth and our
Yes.
environment we are living in, it's something universal. You don't necessarily have to belong to a certain category to feel like is your cause. But again, we see the same kind of people being complacent in that area as well. And I think a lot of it's going back to giving yourself that confidence and agency that, okay, I might be one person, my voice might not be that loud, but I still have an impact, however big, however small. And I think it's, as I said, a reciprocal relationship. So the more you give, the more also you get, in a sense. And then you could just find a bit more about where you stand in this world, in this time. There's been different causes, different situations throughout time, and this is for some reason how we're experiencing this lifetime, and how we choose to interact with it, I think it's really just individual.
Yes. I wonder as well with the environment, because it's such a pressing issue, and with all the fires and extreme weather events and greater heat, that we're experiencing and in various places, that there is a little bit of overwhelm at times, or again, denial, or like, what can I do? Or I need to drive my car. I need to have my 3 holidays a year, the kind of, I've suffered enough through COVID. I'm going to damn well have a good time now for the next, and not really getting the fact that we actually have to come together massively to try and address this. We can't just leave it to the politicians. Like, they can do a lot and business can do a lot, but we all have to make adjustments, I think, in the way we live our lives. Would you agree with that, Hasti?
It's actually a story that what you're saying reminds me of. It's so basically it's a very famous parable in Buddhism. Probably you've also heard it. So in Buddhism, there's a closer relationship between a student and a teacher. And then this particular student keeps going to a teacher, asks questions, and the teacher won't answer. So one day they're really frustrated, and they're just saying, if you don't answer this question, I'm just going to quit. I won't be here anymore. And then the teacher tells the story of a man who was struck by an arrow, and a surgeon rushes to tend to him, see to him, and he's like, I need to know who shot the arrow, what's their name, where did it come from, what kind of arrow it was. So all these questions, and then they wouldn't let the surgeon touch them. So eventually this person dies. And I think it's a good example of just thinking that, okay, if you are having something acute, address the first symptom first. And then you go and think about, okay, why that, why this, why that. We can't ignore all this extreme environmental changes that really just leaves people with nothing but their lives at best. People losing all of their homes, everything they worked hard for. And I think to close our eyes to that really just takes a special talent right now. And I believe the more we practice yoga, mindfulness, all of this, we can't close our eyes that easily, So hopefully that would become that accumulative action of just everybody taking a bit of responsibility.
Yeah. You're so right. We kind of need to take the blinkers off one by one, and this kind of sense of connection that, like, what happens wherever, whether it's extreme weather in Canada or the islands, Haiti or places. I mean, there's just been so many places this summer alone. It's almost overwhelming to keep track of them, but in so many different parts of the globe that, as you say, it takes a special talent, the talent of denial and self kind of delusion to not believe it's urgent. And yeah, it's a great point that yoga and mindfulness might be a way of connecting us to one another and caring more, and kind of inspiring us to use our energy for something positive. I've just one more question for you, Hasti, and it's returning again to the benefits of yoga. What can politicians and policymakers do? I know you're not one of those, but to promote greater awareness of mind-body unity in childhood and over the life course, because it seems to me there isn't great understanding in the wider world about mind-body unity. It's kind of the mind and the body, and they're quite disconnected, and emotions are somewhere else entirely. So what could they do to promote this better understanding, Hasti?
I think there's many different angles that the change can be made. From an individual level, the politicians can practice yoga themselves, you know. And then the adults practicing helps the children. But I think this is also where science comes in, because our society, for better or worse, needs that proof. And just having people who could bridge these gaps, you know, who can just present them with facts. People like, I think Gabor Maté is doing a great job at that, saying that, okay, even if we don't have the well-being of a humankind in our best, it's not in our best interest, but if you just think about a capitalistic point of view, if you want people to have less physical problems, if you want to invest less in rehabilitation programs and all of that, this is for your own benefit, you know. So I think that's another angle that really can be helpful, just having actual data that cannot be disputed. So I won't tell them that, please experience this so you know for yourself. It's more like, yeah, let's do something about it, because at this point we really just need that extra support, you know. Can be just supporting the teachers, supporting the studios, having it in the school level, not just yoga, but all kinds of practices that help us just get connected more with our physical bodies.
Yeah, I think it could be very beneficial in schools, and as well, as you say, for teachers who are stressed, you know, and even, you know, I have great empathy, I suppose, and I can't kind of get my head around how the medical people worked through COVID either, you know, the stress and burnout, particularly in some countries like the States and the UK, where people were dropping like flies, or in the developing world where they didn't have even proper masks. But, you know, there's a lot of really bright, really cerebral people who are totally again disembodied and not connected with their own sensations, or the fact that they're nearing burnout. So if we at least gave kids a vocabulary very early on about tuning into sensations and noticing, do you think that over the lifetime that we might have healthier generations by doing that?
100%. And it's also just to not normalize toxic behavior. And my dad is a physician, and I'm just amazed, like, as somebody who knows so much about human body, the importance they gave to their sleep, to it's mind-blowing, you know. And also, like, I see it a lot with doctors who are working with body, not really trusting so much the psychologist or the psychiatrist. Psychiatrist, so I can't say that word. But I think that again comes back to our culture of self-care and prioritizing ourselves, something that maybe the boomer generation completely forgot about. And then now we are just going back that, okay, how do I do better? And perhaps looking for answers in many years back. Something that has been there, so it's not new, but then trying to adapt it to our current circumstances.
And for parents as well, like I have 2 kids, and I go to the yoga studio a lot at the moment. And part of it is like, yes, maybe it's selfish, but it's also to help me kind of be more regulated, to be less stressed, to be less reactive, so that there are benefits for others in my life. Like, you know, do you think we need to, you mentioned self-care, like self-care is not selfish, isn't that correct?
No, 100%. Yeah, and it's the bare minimum, you know. but again, that comes back to normalizing, just burning ourselves and valuing things that are not working towards the greater good for ourselves. Maybe that can be just working many hours without really realizing, do I like this job? Is this giving me joy? And then without realizing, how can I eat better? Stuff like that, you know? That really just, it's like a cascade effect of, I really believe in the just small sums, you know, if you just do a little bit of improvement there and then try to eat a little bit better there and then maybe going to sleep a little bit, you know, and it really adds up. I think it is really perhaps the answer of not just looking for groundbreaking changes, but like just tiny little changes that can really add up with time.
Yes, and I definitely, again, I think just for my own improved energy over the last 9 months, and albeit I'm a bit of a fanatic at the moment, it's not sustainable forevermore, I'd say. But like, if a few more people got the energetic benefits and also, you know, just got more in tune with themselves, they'd be better able to be attuned to others and maybe the planet, as we say, and just show a bit more kindness and consideration for one another at a time of enormous upheaval in various places.
100%. Yes, couldn't agree more.
Okay. Well, look, Hasti, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed it. It's been lovely. We've never chatted for so long. It's normally...
Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate just this time being able to talk and just dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. So guys, this has been Relationship Matters with me, Jane Mulcahy, and Hasti Yavari.
Yes.
And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it, and check out some yoga if you haven't already done it. Thanks very much, Hasti.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.